Quiet Place 2 does something quite interesting for the horror genre by being not very good, and if that is not a headline for the review of the AV Club, I don't know what is. They should just hire me already. Now, I don't want my voice to appear overly critical and bitter when it comes to talking about this film, because I don't even know if dislike is a fair assessment of my judgment of the film. I know hatred certainly isn't. I didn't hate the film by any stretch of the imagination, but I know I didn't quite like it either. What for me was the prevailing thing was a feeling of numbness, and that's by no means a great thing to have while you're watching a movie. You want to be entertained, you want to feel something, but this was not some catastrophic work of cinema that's a case of sequelitis that somehow lessens the original's quality and legacy by its own failings and mistakes. It was just kind of a film that had some pretty big structural flaws that brought it down to that mediocre quality. The core mistakes of this film are all set up in the first 15 minutes. Everything that will ultimately make this film down to that mediocre quality, it's all foretold in that opening section, in the day one invasion. And the first thing is the lack of emotional depth added on to the characters. When it comes to its identity as a sequel, Quiet Place 2 is a pretty big disappointment because it does not do it does not fulfill one of the core expectations of sequels, that they add on to the characters and to the universe. When it comes to sequels, when you wait 2 years to watch something that's going to bring your favorite characters back to life again, you want them to change. You want to see how they have evolved and how the themes are going to be reinforced or in some cases subverted. And while the latter may be less popular, even that is better than the worst case scenario, that you do nothing at all. The characters stay mostly the same. It makes for an exceptionally boring experience, and that's what happens and is foretold in the first 15 minutes. You know that the family speaks sign language, and yet that is the only thing that is stressed in this opening. Sure, there is one piece of extremely common exposition that is going to, you'll know immediately, you'll recognize it immediately when it happens, when it's called back to later in the narrative. But besides that, there's nothing, not an emotional piece of Krasinski or his family that we don't know about that is shown in this section. Even the day one invasion doesn't offer a fresh enough perspective to actually feel its presence is worthwhile. And when you don't have strong characterization, all that's left are the sequences, are the thrilling sequences where the characters are hiding from or trying to attack these aliens. And that really isn't done well either. What I liked about the original is that every sequence is so intimately structured that even though they're not jumping out at you every second, there's a momentum to it. Everything changes. The characters are moving from location to location, trying tactic after different tactic, and are face new challenges. But that's not the case here. What I saw here was a confusion of patience and slowness. What Krasinski was trying to do was, in my perspective, I don't know what is going through his head, but he was trying to make everything seem really nail-biting, that he was trying to build it up and make it seem every reveal and every jump scare seem terrifying. But in my opinion, it just lessened the effect of the jump scares in and of themselves. I thought that everything was too drawn out. In the opening sequence specifically, they keep on hinting at the aliens, and then they never show them. And then it takes, sometimes minutes on end for them to actually be involved. And I thought by that point, when you're just sitting around waiting in silence, it's not riveting cinema. It's not something that adds on to the characters. And so I'm just left sitting staring at people, not doing anything, doing the classic shush motion. And that's all you got. And once you have that, and I'm not very, when I'm not invested because I know that most of these characters are going to survive, then all you got is the jump scare. And when you're just down to jump scares, you're in a very scary position. There is an excruciating part of this film where they try and interlink the three sequences. You have the boy back at base with the baby, you have the mother looking for medicines to help the boy after his injury, and you have the girl working with Cillian Murphy to go look beyond the sea, to look for help, to give help, all that good jazz. And these three sequences are interlinked. There's a center of tension to every single one of these scenes, and it is drawn out for what seems like 15 minutes on end. There's just a lot of walking around, and you know something is going to happen, and because they wait so long, there's not a lot that Krasinski can do to surprise you. You wait so long that you know that eventually the scares are going to be coming. I didn't feel as though that a single moment of shock value was kept in this film because of how long he stretches these sequences out. And it's just characters, as I said, walking around, just moving, just maneuvering their way and navigating around these monsters. And the actual explosions, the actual bursts of tension at the end, is not particularly satisfying either, in its violence, in the destruction of characters that we don't like, in the possible catharsis that comes with defeating the villains. No, nothing really changes, except that maybe you can say in the Cillian and the girl story where they actually advance from one place to the next. But besides that, there's nothing to this film, in this sequence in particular, that feels like it's moving, that has any sense of urgency when it comes to doing these action scenes, and it doesn't make the film feel lean. Even though it's only an hour and 37 minutes long, it feels like a real boring ride at some times, where you have characters just walking around as you would in something like The Last of Us without anything else really going on. Now, a lot of people may think my comments are unreasonable, and they would ask, naturally, what did I like about the film? What would I have wanted? And well, what I would have wanted, spoiler alert, is one of the examples of Emily Blunt going back to the grave of the child in the original Quiet Place. I thought that was a great scene that was able to take the themes of the nuclear family in this movie and expand upon that. I'm not going to reveal exactly what she did in that scene, but it got me thinking about the subtext of the two films, of the nuclear family, of its strength, of how it's hurt and how it struggles through this situation, and I was actually invested at that point. I thought that was a great scene. But when you don't have that, when you just have her looking for pharmaceuticals, there's not a lot of depth. There's not a lot of things where I can read between the lines, and that's exactly what happens with the boy. You have him looking around for potentially stuff about Cillian Murphy that could be dastardly. I mean, one of the things that The Last of Us really brought to the forefront when it comes to the horror genre is that the maniacal intentions of everyone, that you can't trust anyone, and yet that's never expanded upon here. He's an inherently suspect guy. They don't immediately trust him from the beginning, and there's always a sense of distrust, but it's never expanded upon, and that's what the kid does for the entirety of the movie. He just sits there, worries, breathes, doesn't breathe because of the oxygen and the limited oxygen in the place he's at. And that's all he does. He's never expanded upon in any way. He gets the short end of the stick more than any other of the characters. He's sidelined most of all, and his sequences, like I said earlier, are not particularly riveting when the monsters actually do get involved. Highlight, which doesn't even feel like a genuine highlight because it's not even that great of a section, is the Cillian and the girl part, which is the most tolerable of all the sequences, but it doesn't do much either. It feels like the makers were very cautious that they didn't want this to be another The Last of Us. They didn't want this to have an extremely close relationship between a teenage girl and a middle-aged type of guy that has lost a lot of faith in the world, and I get that they were being cautious of that, but when you don't have them go through a lot of exchanges and you don't have them reveal a lot to each other, then you have nothing to work with. Then you have this girl who we know is as good as John Krasinski, who we know is morally practically impenetrable, and she showcases that throughout the entire film. She's a static character. She doesn't change, and she's not particularly entertaining because, well, you don't even have that much dialogue for her to work with and show her charm and personality. And then you got Cillian, who, yes, does change, who does become a better person by the end, but you can't even feel as though that the weight of that is felt. You can't... that it's not a tangible thing. Like, we know he changes, we know that he goes from not wanting to help to indeed helping, but I couldn't even feel the emotional weight of that instance as well because there's not much dialogue to work with. It is certainly one of the limitations of the story that Krasinski is trying to tell, but those limitations aren't felt in the original because of the stuff like the waterfall scene, because there is more dialogue in the form of sign language, because there is more, you can notice it less because there's more great action scenes. And when you don't have that here, the thing kind of falls flat. And even at the end when they go to this new community, it doesn't have a lot of effect there either because none of the consequences are felt. None of the happiness and the glee of being with the community is shared by these characters. None of the consequences and the horror of having an alien on this peaceful community are felt. The film just ends basically on the same note as the original. You conquer the alien, but nothing was really changed. All you have is the knowledge that sonic frequencies can harm them, and that's what the film ends on again. Yes, there is a nice piece of parallelism where both the kids defeat these aliens individually, but even then, it doesn't feel like the boy changed a lot, and at that moment it was really earned for him, and while it was earned for the daughter, I couldn't help but desire more out of her story as well. What is developing in her mind? What is going on with the world now that they have this advantage, now that they can harm monsters a lot more easily? I don't know, because the film just ends and there still feels like there's a lot to be answered, but not in a sense where you can expand upon it in another movie. The film feels so bony, so unfulfilling in its own aspects, that you want some of those questions and some of the exchanges and dialogue to be had at that moment, but you don't get that satisfaction. The film ends on a much, much more tame action sequence than you would have gotten in the climax of the original, and that's the movie. Place 1 and A Quiet Place 2 are both roughly the same length, and yet the first one feels so much more meatier, like there's so much more to it. And sometimes that just comes down to small little things. Why is one better than the other? Well, because one starts with a shocking murder of an innocent child, and one starts with an extremely slow look into the first day of the invasion that doesn't have any emotion to it, that doesn't bring anything to the table that we didn't already know before, because one stresses the importance of family and details what it takes to survive in this new lifestyle, and one has a character sideline for the entirety of the movie. It's simple stuff that feels like it could be fixed, and you have an entirely different film here that it could live up to the original. But the lack of thematic strength of the film, the lack of characterization that is really comes down to the awkward structuring of the thing and separating the characters, that doesn't help it at all. And ultimately, the scenes that are so drawn out, where you're waiting for the anticipation, is lessened by how long it takes for the monsters to actually show their faces and start attacking the characters. And when you pull all of that together, you have ultimately not necessarily a disappointing feature. I didn't walk out of the theaters being really bummed by its quality, but it by no means, in my opinion, is a great movie. It's one that suffers from just a lack of talent and tact when it comes to building up these scenes with the monsters, and outside of that, very little expansion of interesting characters from the original, which is just one of the core fundamentals of what a sequel is supposed to do. And that's A Quiet Place Part 2. And that's a ride. And so my final verdict for A Quiet Place Part 2 is a 2.5 out of 5 on the Letterboxd scale, which I have been using ever since I got Letterboxd. But if you want to bring it up to 10 like beforehand, then it's a 5 out of 10. There you go. It's a mediocre film. If you like the original, I would still suggest going to see it, not just for the experience of the cinema, but because of the fact you're probably going to think it's above average. But besides that, I apologize for not uploading that much over the past couple months. Schedule's just been busy, but I wanted to pump this out no matter its quality, just to get it out there and get back on the YouTube track. And so with all that, thank you so much for watching Lightspeed Brothers, and have a great day.